ready? Okay. I'll call the meeting to order. It is 7 o'clock. Happy summer to everybody. It's first day and a little cool out over summer. We have the minutes from June 7th, 2022 tonight to approve. We're looking for a motion.
I'll move to approve the minutes for June 7th, 2022, subject to modification.
Is there a second?
A second.
Yeah, we have a second. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. And page 4. There are no corrections to the minutes. All those in favor of approving the minutes of June 7th, 2022, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So we've done the minutes. Moving on, then the next item on the agenda is public comment. If there's anyone who has any public comment, either here in the room or on Zoom, this is the time to do it. Yes. If you just identify yourself, come up to the microphone if you would. Well, we need to be able to record it, so.
My name is Donna Roser, and I hope you don't mind if I read, but to ramble if I talk off the cuff. I know the Williston community, and specifically this board, have been vocal on speaking out against racism, support of flying the Black Lives Matter flag, working with the Community Justice Center, conversations centered on Williston shared values, the desire for the town to become more equitable within its practices, wanting a more inclusive community, and publicly embracing DEI. So in light of this, I have to say I was surprised when I saw in the June 16th local paper the update on the hiring of the 9 new fire staff. On March 1st, the town provided their overwhelming support and voted to approve a budget to include these additional staff hires. On April 26th, the town manager announced at a select board meeting that the 9 people were hired. From a vote to the actual hiring of 9 candidates 8 weeks later is pretty phenomenal, especially in these present times. I'm not casting aspersions as to the quality of the hires. That's neither my place nor what I'm trying to do. But I'm wondering if at the beginning of this hiring process, a wider net should have been cast and sufficient time taken so as to get a wider breadth of potential candidates that possibly might have been more inclusive of the society which Williston claims it wants to represent. Out of the 9 candidates, there were no women, nor does there appear to be persons of color. Although I don't want to jump to any conclusions, and I realize the danger of making assumptions based on a picture. It just seems to me somewhat odd to me that we talk the talk, but we don't seem to walk the walk. Did we squander an excellent opportunity to really make a difference and take action to support what so many are talking about and aspiring to? I don't know that the town will be hiring such a large group of new employees at one time for permanent positions again, as we did here. I'm just curious if the individual select board members have any comments on this, or if I was the only one who saw that picture in the paper and had these thoughts.
Thank you for your comments, and I think if you would contact Chief Collette and Eric Wells, they would be able to tell you more information about the process. It was a nationwide process. We had, I think, 40 some odd candidates. Actually, a woman was offered the position, at least one woman was offered a position, but she did not pass the physical exam. And that's all I can tell you, but I think if you touch base with Chief Collette, he can tell you more about it.
Okay, any other thoughts from anybody else? I mean, I was just kind of somewhat surprised with all this talk that we've had. And it was, I guess, somewhat disappointing, I think, when I saw that. Any thoughts, Jeff? You made comments, you said that we're, you know, I think I saw in the paper you talked about systemic racism in Williston. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, or possibly that and how it, the connection with hiring.
I'm a little hesitant to give thoughts without first understanding, what the hiring process was and the pool of people who did apply. But my thought is if I know this town government, the goal was to achieve diversity as much as possible. Why it couldn't be achieved, I just can't answer that.
And so I think, honestly, we're a white state, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean,
And so maybe, as I said, maybe the net had to be cast wider. Because if we're just looking in Williston or Essex, we're all very similar. Everybody looks almost like you guys, except for Greta. So, if we're truly, I guess, I don't know, 8 weeks, it was a short period of time. Most employers, I was just watching the news before I came here, and they're all complaining that they can't find people. So it just seems awful fast that we hired a total of 9 people, and maybe, I don't know, I'm just tossing some things out, I'm sure there was a desire to get them into the academy quick, so that they can start serving their community. But, maybe would it have been wiser to maybe hire 5 now and 4 later if maybe the pool wasn't kind of what we're aspiring to? I don't know, just some thoughts. But I have to say, I was somewhat surprised.
so it sounds to me like you're, when I say questioning, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in a positive way. Whether our hiring process is robust enough so that we can achieve some of these goals that we're looking for. And my thought on that is absolutely, let's take a look at that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't think I'm alone. Maybe I'm the only one who'll come up here and speak to the fact, but I just think that we're so focused on this, as we rightly should be. But it doesn't seem like when we have the opportunity of providing a good paying job with benefits, we didn't come through.
I mean, I can just make an observation in my work. We've been hiring a lot because of some increased funding that's coming into the state. And we are having basically a similar results.
Much like Jeff, obviously, without having an in-depth look into the hiring process, don't want to speak too much to it. But I do think that this as it always is an excellent opportunity to examine these processes. And obviously, while this hiring has happened, it is a good, opportunity for us to say, what did we do well and what can we improve going forward, and what did needs to be improved. Why, what is the pool of candidates, lacking, the diversity that we're striving for. What I will say in terms of timeline, the one thing I do know is that the application, the period when they were accepting applications was open for a much longer time than those 8 weeks. So
then?
I think when we had discussed, that we were going to be hiring firefighters, we opened the pool of applications and said to everybody who was applying, obviously, we're not sure if this is going to happen. We're opening the process, but with your knowledge that, this may not, these 9 jobs may not happen. And so we wanted to, knowing the market, they wanted to have as much time as possible to allow applicants to come in. So the actual accepting of candidates and all of that didn't happen, obviously, until, we had approved their hiring. But, that's all, that's the most information I have about that right now. So.
Well, I think, and certainly I would hope that the board would take some time, within your own time, to kind of look at that and kind of reassess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone on Zoom who wishes to make any comment?
I'm not seeing anyone. Eric, do you see anybody in the chat?
Right.
Nope, no, excuse me, no one online looking for public comment this evening.
Having trouble hearing you, Eric.
No one online for public comment.
Okay. Then we'll move on to the Williston Police 50th anniversary presentation with Chief Foley. Eric, do you want to introduce the subject?
Yep, can you hear me okay, Terry?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I had a frog in my throat there. So earlier this year, the Williston Police Department celebrated its 50th anniversary. Certainly a great honor for our department and everyone who's served. Chief Foley's here this evening. He'd like to make a presentation to the town on behalf of the department. And I've also included in the board's materials a resolution to consider to recognize the department's 50 years. I'll turn things over to Chief Foley.
Good. Chief, welcome.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to present a quick presentation this evening, but I wanted to talk a few minutes about the police department. On May 1st this year, 2022, the Williston Police Department celebrated the 50th anniversary as a police department. Special thanks go out to both Sergeant Brian Claffey and Eric Shepard for designing the badge that I'm presenting tonight to the board and the community, as well as ones we wear right now, we'll be wearing for the continuation of this year. They spent numerous hours designing it, and I finalized the selection with this badge. It incorporates the history and the Vermont heritage. How did we get here? Well, back in 1970, 71, the department was called the Rural Police Patrol. And there was discussion on original police department combining Essex, Jericho, Underhill, and Williston. However, that didn't occur. On May 1st, 1972, the Williston Rural Police became the Williston Police Department under the leadership of Howard Lundeville. Highlights of the 1972 town report included, and I state, for 6 months there was a police patrol 3 nights a week. During November and December, it was reduced to 2 nights a week on a staggered basis with free patrols. Incidents of vandalism and breaking entry had been greatly curtailed, as has the, quote, all night about town drivers. I got a kick out of that. Each patrolman was provided his own uniform, had to provide his own uniform, his firearms, and his equipment for his police cruisers. Besides Chief Lundeville, there was a captain by the name of Preston Sharlin, and there was 9 patrol officers. They were the first officers of this agency was Donald Burbank, Kermit LeClaire, Lester Lundeville, Francis Mahan Jr., Donald Wheel, William Murphy, Charles Reed, Leo Roy, and Henry Terrier. And we made a copy from the original town report of the police department back then. You can all take a look at it. But I want to present a shadow box on behalf of the men and women of the Williston Police Department to the board. And you can hang it someplace in here. The walls are kind of bare. But as chair, I'd like to give this to you on behalf of the Williston Police Department, and it says the Wilson Police Department, 50 years celebrating service, May 1st, 1972, May 1st, 2022.
Beautiful looking badge.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pass that around for folks, and we do have a resolution proposed for celebrating the 50th anniversary, and Eric, or who, I'm not sure who put this together, Eric or the chief?
I put it together. Would you like me to read it, Chair?
So if you'd give us a little bit of the background and a little bit about what the resolution says.
Sure. Just pulling it up here. So as Chief Foley spoke to, the Wilson Police Department was formed on May 1st, 1972, under the leadership of Chief Howard Lunderville, and celebrated its 50th years of service on May the 1st of this year. And I pulled some additional information about our department. It's a dedicated group of professionals who are committed to working with the community to make Williston a safe and desirable place to live, work, and visit. And the department's mission is to partner with the community to solve problems and improve public safety in a manner that is fair, impartial, transparent, and consistent. And the core values of the department are integrity, teamwork, respect, advocacy, and empathy, fairness, and impartiality, and professionalism. And this resolution would be resolved to recognize the Williston Police Department and its staff for 50 years of protecting and serving the community.
Good, thank you. Any questions for Eric regarding the resolution?
Just a quick one, Eric. First of all, I think this is very good. Thank you. The only thing I'm wondering is if it should include information about Williston's growth over this period, which has been tremendous and put, I think, quite a bit of stress on the department. But despite that, we're still getting excellent service. So that's my only thought.
Thank you. If we wish to approve the resolution as it comes to us tonight, there is a motion proposed.
I'll move to adopt the resolution honoring the Williston Police Department for its 50th anniversary as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Well, I'm certainly not going to vote against it. That it did include that whereas, not that I'm a fan of whereas, but so be it.
And I think over the course of the year, there'll be a celebration that continues on, and we can recognize the growth of the department since that time.
Okay.
So all those in favor of the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So thank you, Chief, and.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
congratulations. I knew most of the people on that original force, so.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
What, you don't like my pen?
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
That's a preview from a lawyer.
So moving on to Chittenden County Communications Union District, and I believe we're going to have two people on Zoom tonight that are coming. Rob Fish, who's the Deputy Director of the Broadband Board, and Regina Mahoney from the CCRPC. And Eric, I'll turn it over to you to get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Terry, and hi, Rob and Regina on Zoom. I'll turn it over to both of them in just a moment, but you have in your board packet a memo from myself and Regina, and I'll just give an introduction off the beginning here. So staff's been working with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission over the past year to evaluate the options for bringing high-speed internet access to addresses in the community that do not currently have access as part of the state of Vermont's goal to increase broadband access statewide. So we'll talk about this evening. An internet connection is measured in two rates, a download speed and an upload speed. The Federal Communications Commission considers an internet connection to be high-speed broadband that has a speed of at least 25 megabits per second for downloads and 3 megabytes per second for uploads. So looking at Williston's data, most recently from 2021 from the Department of Public Service, there are about 138 addresses in Williston that are lacking that 25.3 speed. We've got just over 3,500 that are served at that 25.3 speed, which we consider cable. and then about 35 that are served at the 100 speed, which would be a fiber connection. The Vermont Community Broadband Board was stood up in 2021 with an objective to bring high-speed fiber broadband to every address in the state. And what we're seeing in Williston and other Chittenden County communities are pockets of addresses, we've been calling them, underserved by broadband access and where these present gaps are occurring. In other towns in the state, this broadband access may be an issue that impacts the majority, if not all, of the community. We're seeing a unique situation in Chittenden County, and these conversations and efforts led by the CCRPC over the past year, reached a conclusion that is communications union district that we'll talk about this evening in the county is the best prospect for unlocking public broadband grant funding to fill these pockets. And we see as an ancillary effect of this potential build out, this broadband network will likely be overbuilt by the service provider, as it will need to run fiber past households that currently have access to the 25.3 cable level of broadband internet to reach these unfilled pockets in the community. And this would create an opportunity for these households to access a fiber level internet connection as part of this project. So a CUD is a new government unit that provides the conduit for the federal and state broadband grant funds to pass through to a provider procured by the CUD, who can then utilize that funding to augment their overall capital investment in the network that they will own and manage. So I think I'll pause there, and I'll turn things over to Regina and Rob, who are really well versed in this, to walk through it a bit more for the board, and look for this evening to give the board an opportunity to ask questions and have a discussion. Part of what we'll talk about is if the county wants to move forward to stand up a CUD, looking at a timeline for later this year, and then there's some legal requirements for how that CUD can be stood up, and a couple communities will need to take the lead later this year with a public vote. So I'll say how the government processes right now. We can just kind of tackle what a CUD is, and I'll turn things over to Regina and Rob. And Rob, I'll make you a co-host so you can share your slides at some point here.
Welcome, both of you, and go right ahead.
Awesome, thank you. Hi everybody, Regina Mahoney, Planning Program Manager for Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. So essentially what that means at CCRPC is that I manage the non-transportation side of the program. That's sort of the easiest way to describe it. So yeah, as Eric said, we have been thinking about broadband for quite some time now, and certainly have been sort of challenged since Chittenden County's situation is really so unique from the rest of the state. It's almost like we're sort of upside down of everybody else's problem. And so because we have such a small percentage of folks in that and underserved category, and because in the grand scheme of things, we have such many more existing service providers in the region, we really were hoping, and really, I think, did our best to try to figure out some solutions that would maybe be more simple or more straightforward without having to go down this communications union district route. I think we sort of turned over every stone and put all our best thinking caps on, and really are just at the point where it really doesn't seem like there's a different solution. I do just want to mention quickly that 2 of our municipalities in the county have done something different. So I just want to quickly explain what that is and why, just so you can understand kind of what this whole thing is. So first, I will say the town of Milton decided to join the Northwest Communications Union District. So that is and was a possibility to potentially join the other surrounding communications union districts rather than creating our own. And that certainly made sense for the town of Milton, and it made sense for the Northwest CUD at the time. At this point, the surrounding CUDs are really like well enough along in their planning efforts and their business plans that it's difficult for them at this point to take on other towns. That's not to say that it's an impossible thing, but it's a little bit tricky at this point in time. The other town I want to point out to folks is the town of Bolton. They were able to work directly with the provider in their municipality, Waitsfield Champlain Telecom, to directly figure out how to put together a plan to overbuild the town of Bolton with fiber. Bolton put about $200,000 on the table. The state put about this is really rough, I'm going to say $450,000 on the table. And Waitsfield Champlain Telecom is on the table for about $1.2 to $1.3 million for the town of Bolton. So these are big dollars, big projects. And that worked really well in that circumstance because Waitsfield Champlain Telecom was able to deal with some of the parameters of the program. And that may be the solution for some of the other towns in Chittenden County that are covered by Waitsfield Champlain Telecom. Most of those municipalities are in the southern part of our county. And I should just say, this might be obvious, but Burlington also already has Burlington Telecom and fully covered by fiber. So they are also well taken care of. For the other towns in the county, there just is not such a simple, clean solution. And so again, we really have kind of come back around to creating a communications union district is likely and potentially the only way to really get the public dollars available to our municipalities in Chittenden County to make some of this broadband expansion service work. The last thing I'll just say before I turn it over to Rob, who really actually knows what he's talking about on this topic, is that time is really of the essence for us. The whole nation is moving forward on broadband expansion right now. And so there's a little bit of the train is out of the station kind of situation where we really want to not get too far behind on this. Also, because of we've got the general election in November, and there is the opportunity to get this question on the ballot without incurring local expense, if we can get there by early August. But that just reminds me, I totally skipped a step, sorry. So to form a communications union district, a new communications union district, we need at minimum 2 municipalities to vote in favor of creation of this governance structure via townwide vote. And then once the district is established, then other municipalities can join via a legislative body decision, but it can't be created at the start without a townwide vote, at least 2 townwide votes. So that's why we're really sort of focused on the November general election to try to potentially get a local question on that ballot rather than doing a special meeting and incurring local expense, but that is also an option. And really, I think the Vermont Community Broadband Board is really looking to Chittenden County to hopefully show some good faith effort towards making use of the funding that they've got allocated towards our municipalities by the end of the calendar year, or they're probably going to be under some pressure to start doling those funds out to other projects that are really on the move. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rob, who's going to give a little bit of a presentation. Yeah, so.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, everybody, and thank you for Regina and Eric. You've covered a lot of what I'm going to cover in a little more depth in the presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about communication union districts. My name is Rob Fish. I'm the Deputy Director of the Vermont Community Broadband Board. I do have a brief presentation. Feel free to interrupt me during it, and I'll keep it quick so there's plenty of time for questions and answers. Let me see if I can get this sharing.
Well, Rob, while you're getting it up, can I ask
Sure.
a question?
Certainly.
CUD, is that at all similar to a union municipal district, such as our solid waste district?
If you're seeing my slideshow right now, you know the first thing I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
Oh, you know this, I can go home now. So yes, a communication union district, it's similar to a solid waste district, a consolidated sewer district, a water district, you name it. It's about communities working together to solve a problem. They're organized under Title 30, was created in 2015, and it was modeled on EC fiber, which I'll talk about in a moment, but I'm going to get through some of the logistics first here. So it's a legal entity for municipalities to start telecom planning. It provides the structure and governance. It also insulates towns from financial risks. A communication union district has no taxing power. It cannot accept any income derived from your taxing authority as a community. Everything must come from either gifts, grants, revenue bonds, income. So it insulates towns from the risks associated with doing their own municipal broadband. A lot of this came out of some of the challenges with Burlington Telecom, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with. So as Regina said, in order for it to happen, it has to be on the warrant or at a November ballot in at least 2 towns, and then new towns can join by a select board. I'm gonna take a step back and look at the map. There was the original communication union district, EC Fiber, that's down by Tunbridge. It took them about 10-15 years to get to where they are right now. They are the district that's serving well over 5,000 customers with fiber in a very rural area. Since then, and especially during the pandemic with the telehealth, remote learning, need broadband. It's expanded around the state. We now have 9 districts, 208 towns. Most of these districts are on their way to starting construction this fall or have already started construction. We approved a grant it was 2 months ago for the Northeast Kingdom Communication Union District for $16 million, and they have a request in for another amendment to expand to additional towns. We'll be considering grant requests from most of the other districts during the months of July and August. You can see the areas that are in gray are not part of communication union districts. You have the Chittenden County area, and then you have areas in the south that are served by VTEL, where they already have fiber, or where there's other pockets where there's a provider that they're working with very closely right now. And Regina mentioned Waitsfield WCVT working with Bolton, and we know that they're committing to building out their entire service territory over the next few years. Some of that in conjunction with CUDs, some of it on their own, but all with assistance of grant funding. So there's a lot on this, but I'm just going to go through some of the reasons for creating a communication union district. The first one is just aggregating the demand, especially in Chittenden County. There's not that many addresses in individual towns to come up with a project. These are addresses that don't have access to 25.3, or now some of the funding is available for if it's 100 by 20. Most cable, if you have access to cable, you have access to those speeds. By creating a communication union district and joining with other towns, you're aggregating that demand. So you're aggregating all the numbers from all of those towns, as opposed to being like, oh, we have 200 addresses that are all at the end of roads that are scattered across the area. How are we going to solve them? It's also a way to really just raise a flag and say that we want to do this as a community. All around the country, and I'm hearing it every day, there's providers that are interested, especially in areas that are a little bit more suburban, where there is some density, in creating a fiber network. This is a way to have a single point of contact. Like the larger companies, they don't want to deal with 50 towns. They rather deal with one entity. And that's why some of our neighbors I'll talk about have had great success in attracting partners. So funders and companies are familiar with municipal districts. If you're building an entire network, it's more efficient if it's larger and it can be integrated and more redundant. Town boundaries are really irrelevant. It's where the wires go. So we're talking more about wire centers, which much to my chagrin, don't follow town boundaries. Like you'll have some towns where half are covered by consolidated, half are covered by Waitsfield, which causes a problem with what one of the requirements in Act 71 is a universal service plan. So a plan for every address that's underserved to be served. The other thing is public accountability. So rather than giving money directly to a company, you have some citizen input. The telecom industry for broadband, it's deregulated. That doesn't exist right now. But this is a way to have an entity that can hold the provider's feet to the fire. So the basic model, and I said there's different models for different CUDs. Several of the CUDs are going for a public ownership model where it is a public-private partnership. They're not trying to operate it themselves, but they're bringing in income from other providers, some revenue from other providers, or have selected a provider to operate the network. EC Fiber is run by ValleyNet. GWI is working with the down in the Deerfield Valley area is working with GWI. And then Google Fiber, just to your north, is going to be working with the Northwest CUD and Lamoille FiberNet. And in this case, the infrastructure is actually owned. You're creating a public asset that can be further leveraged. And its startup comes from grant funding, income from the operator, donations. The CUDs will build and own the infrastructure. The operator provides the service. Once the grant funding runs out, they access the revenue bond market to complete the project if there's not enough income from the providers. It's kind of the model that EC Fiber used. Our goal is to provide the communication union districts with 60% of the funds they need via grant funding. The rest they would have to go find elsewhere. So then there's just another public-private partnership model, and this is what could be an option here. Act 71 prohibits individual towns from working with a telecom provider that is in more than 5 counties. Well, Consolidated is in more than 5 counties. So Consolidated cannot receive funding directly. A town is not an eligible applicant. But if they are working with a CUD, so there's another layer of accountability and oversight, they can receive the funding. Consolidated throughout the northern part of your county is the carrier. They are on the poles already, and there's a chance that it's very likely that they will be overbuilding cable over time. So that would be one possibility here. The CUD would serve as the negotiator, provide the oversight. They may own some of the assets, likely not all the assets. Consolidated as Fidium just negotiated an agreement with the Bennington County to do a project where parts of the infrastructure will be owned with the grant funded areas. The part that Fidium is funding on their own, they're going to own. Oops, sorry. So we talked a little bit about the challenges facing the non-CUD towns, especially the Chittenden County ones. Talked about scattered addresses. It would require a lot of overbuild of cable to get to those addresses. Some of the other small providers are not interested in competing with cable. They don't want to poke the beast. So there's also the split wire centers I mentioned in different communities. There hasn't been as much study of the issue in the towns because there hasn't been as much of a demand. A year ago, if you said that, I think Williston is about 95 or 96% covered by cable, that's pretty darn well served. It's not a priority, but as the rest of the state and the rest of the country moves towards speeds of 100 by 100, so this is an upload and a download speed. The upload speed is what you need for the video conferencing. It's what you need for telehealth and medicine. It's what allows you to have a Zoom call without it freezing. It's also future-proof, and it's what's the future is going to hold. So we're in a situation now where the rest of the state is building fiber, the 100 by 100, and Chittenden County is risking falling behind. It's not going to last long. There's a market case for a provider to come in here and build the fiber. That's why you have cable in the first place. But it's creating a strange dynamic, let's say. There's other challenges in the Chittenden County towns. There's a lot more underground utilities in more suburban areas. There's some gaps in the infrastructure. There's also some exclusive conduit in any of the multi-dwelling units, a lot of the condominiums or apartment complexes. I also mentioned that Act 71 requires a plan to reach every address that's underserved in the community. So when your addresses are scattered all around, it's hard to have one plan for solving that without coordination. That is the role the CUD can provide if you have to coordinate between multiple providers or screen multiple providers. We're also limited by how funds must be distributed. They must be distributed by the number of underserved addresses or underserved miles, which also limits the amount of funds that are available to areas that are heavily cabled, as the priority is bringing them up, but the state wants to bring everybody up. So I just have Williston on here. We already talked about the numbers of addresses. The areas that are in red here are the roads that don't have service. So it's scattered. But the biggest reason right now I want to recommend creating a communication union is big companies want big deals. They don't want to negotiate with a single town. They want to negotiate with 20, 30, 40, 50 towns. And we've seen the results already. There's no chance Google Fiber would have been interested in working with the town of Georgia. But working with all of Grand Isle, Franklin, and Lamoille counties, that got their attention with a single point of process. And they're working out the details right now, and it's looking good. I'm actually out in Cleveland right now, and at a conference. This is what we have being featured right now, is that Vermont's making progress on public-private partnerships with the Google Fiber deal. And we have, in Southern Vermont, I mentioned, with Consolidated. So things are happening. We feel that bringing together the various towns in Chittenden County are a way to make sure those underserved addresses are served and to help lift everybody else up. So let me stop sharing now. There we go. So it's a lot of information there. Sorry, and I've been up since 3 a.m. So bear with me. Flying out here.
So I'll open up to questions for the board.
One quick one, Rob. What is a split wire center? I didn't understand that.
Sure. So a split wire center is where part of the town is served by, in this case, is served by Consolidated, and another part of the town is served by Waitsfield. Makes it where you have to negotiate with more than one partner in order to get a universal service plan. So what it also means is that those towns that are split by Waitsfield can't get grant funding unless we figure out a solution for those addresses that are served by Consolidated. It's one of the, Act 71 is designed to make sure no one's left behind and that providers don't come in and cherry pick the addresses with the best density, the best business case. But there's the fact that wire centers don't follow town boundaries causes complications. At least you only have 2 carriers. I'm dealing with towns where there's 3 in one town.
And it seems like the options in terms of what this network, for lack of better words, would look like in the future are kind of endless. It could be one provider that whoever the CUD ends up being negotiates with. It could be multiple carriers. It could be a CUD-owned system. We just don't know right now, I assume.
Yeah, there's a variety of options and a variety of pathways forward. The easiest is usually negotiating with an incumbent provider. They're already on the polls. It makes it faster deployments. They can usually do it cheaper. And frankly, it helps them avoid competition. But there is this big interest right now that's happening all across the country, and what we're seeing up in Northwest, where it's a publicly owned network that's open access, where multiple providers can be on that network and compete. It's something that if you would have asked me 2 years ago if that could work in rural areas, I would be very skeptical. But there's a lot of companies that are ready to put money into it to make it happen. They just need an entity to negotiate with. And Chittenden County is high up on that list. I can pretty confidently say that if there was a single entity to negotiate with.
Moving on to the CUD aspect of this, who's interested in being at one of those two towns or multiple, or more than two towns? I assume you can have more than two towns decide to move ahead with it.
Yeah, so great question. We have been talking with the northern towns about this. We haven't been talking to the Waitsfield, Champlain, Telecom towns about this. Not that we won't, or, because they may be interested too. We're just not seeing it as much of a need, as an urgent need right now. So other towns that are certainly interested, South Burlington, Essex, Colchester has been putting a lot of thought into this, and for quite a while not interested in joining a CUD because they were considering joining Northwest CUD also. But I think they're in conversations as well. And just
Westford as well, I believe.
Right. Yes. Thank you. And one thing just to add to that previous question, the thing that sort of made the final difference for me in my mind that this is the right path to take was just acknowledging that our current cable providers, like Rob said, because we're at a pretty decent density in Chittenden County, they are likely over time to overbuild with fiber. It just makes sense for their building, for their business plan and their business model. But without the oversight, they are not necessarily going to come in and serve those underserved neighborhoods and roads. And so that really is what's kind of pushing me over the edge to do this, because, and I'm not sure that going to a public ownership model makes sense, although I think I'm a little bit of a dinosaur and might get to where Rob is, where this is exciting, right? Like this is really big, different stuff. But right now for me, if we can get public ownership on those cable companies of when they switch over to fiber, they're going to also hit those people that are completely underserved right now. That's a win-win. And that's just, for me, reason alone for us to go this route.
Yeah, and I think as you mentioned, public oversight, and it's we do know that consolidated, the telephone company, not the cable company. They've said they're going to serve 200,000 Vermont addresses over the next few years with fiber. It's kind of hard to find 200,000 Vermont addresses without entering Chittenden County.
Other questions?
Do the towns that create the CUD, do they have to border each other? It seems to me that if you're going to work together to implement a plan to get these fiber optic cables, if you have towns that are actually separate from each other, that might be kind of difficult.
I think it depends on what model if you're building if it's a new operator coming in that's building a new network, putting new wires up on the poles, it would be helpful if they're contiguous. There are ways to do middle mile to connect those areas. If it's just negotiating with an existing provider that happens to be in all of those towns, it's less of a concern. But it will make it easier because the wire centers don't follow town boundaries.
Okay. You've mentioned a couple times stringing wires up on the poles. What about towns where we don't allow that? We don't have poles in some of our subdivisions because we don't allow it.
Well, for those areas, I hope you have extra conduit. If not, it makes it a lot more expensive to build in those areas. And that's just the nature of it in terms of going underground.
Okay, I see. Bruce is on.
Bruce?
Probably no.
So, but there's different models that could make it work, but that would be a limitation, and that would be something that by working together, the CUD and the towns can address, and those might be higher cost areas. Those are negotiating points with whatever provider. But if you're able to give a provider a bigger deal, you're going to have a lot more sway.
Bruce, your thoughts?
The answer, Jeff, is that a lot of times when utilities come in to do work now, you're right, we say everything's underground, but a lot of them have to put in not only their own conduit, but a spare conduit for some future use. The issue with that is finding out exactly where all that has happened at. But there are quite a few of them out there. Like just as an example, the Muddy Brook project we just did, got extra conduit in the ground, spare conduit. Most contracts now say, they have to add, put in yours plus one extra for a spare or something. So there's a lot of them out there. How many more for developments where stuff are underground or not? I would think there's probably some there, but once again, it's a matter of identifying them. It's not going to be absolute all over town by any means.
So that's something this entity could help you, and the state would be able to provide what we call pre-construction funds that can help with some of the planning that's necessary. Those are the types of funds that, whether it's the high level design or whether it's a detailed design or hiring capacity for making this happen, that have allowed the other CUDs to get where they are today.
So I think tonight our job is to see if we have any initial interest in pursuing this. And if we do, what other questions or information do we need to have answered?
One other question I have, sorry. Let's say Williston decides that, yes, we want to be either part of or help lead a CUD. What is the liability that Williston would be facing if we were to do that?
That's one of the beauties of a CUD. It's you're creating a new municipality. You're creating a municipal district. It helps insulate the town. What the town has to provide is they have to appoint 2 delegates, just like with any kind of commission, two delegates to the board. That's the decision-making board for the CUD. I think there's something else in there about providing space for equipment as necessary, but that's the major one. So your liability is limited. Your credit rating impact is very much limited. So if you did go the public option and you went for the revenue bonds, it would be the CUD holding the revenue bond. Okay. There is no general obligation bond option.
Okay. So the answer is simply, minimal to none.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, can I just a couple questions? I'm sorry, I'm really lost on the basics here a little bit. Is one of the possible results of this that the infrastructure that would be created would be owned by the municipality that we're talking about?
Owned by the communication union district. That's one of the possibilities, whether it's the entire network or parts of the network.
But that municipality would not be a utility. It would not be operating the system itself. It would just own the physical aspect of it.
Yes, it would be, everything else would be contracted out. We're not encouraging anybody to try to own and operate it themselves. There's experts for a reason that do these things.
Okay, well, contracted out, does that mean that the municipality that we're talking about would be responsible for finding somebody to manage the services?
If it's a publicly owned network, yes. So that's one of the roles that the board would play. But usually what you're doing is it's a very long-term contract, because nobody wants to get their electronics on a network and then leave after a few years. Like there's some sunk costs that go in there. Like most of the contracts the CUDs are doing are 10 to 20 years, and it's more of just having that check-in after 10 years to make a decision of whether to add someone else to the network, or if it's not working. It's just another way to provide some public accountability and oversight.
Thanks. One of the things on the basic model public ownership slide said the CUD's access to revenue bond markets to complete the build out of their district. What do you mean by revenue bond market? Do you mean that's where the voters would vote for a bond like we do for an infrastructure project here? What does that mean?
So it's a bond that's based on the revenue generated by the network. So it's not backed by the grand list. And that's the only tool available to the CUDs. That they have a business plan they bring to the bond market or bring to, I guess it's not a bank. Bring to the bond market. I'll leave that to the finance people. And the business plan shows how much revenue is going to be generated, and it's enough revenue to make the bond payments. But they get the money for the capital expense up front.
What if there's a default?
With the revenue bonds, there's nothing that comes back to the taxpayers. It's the asset is what is backing it. So the network, the fiber, thing in the air, the equipment, that's what backs up a revenue bond.
Is that one of the things that happened with Burlington Telecom? Was they were about to be sued and their infrastructure was about to be taken as collateral?
Burlington Telecom used general funds. One of the reasons why there's a prohibition on general funds being used for municipal broadband is because of that, what happened.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up? This revenue bond market or these revenue bonds, it sounds to me like, unlike a municipal bond where you have the tax space to basically give the bank encouragement that we aren't going to default. The model I hear here is there's very little the bank is going to look at and say, yeah, they've defaulted, we can collect. Does that mean that those revenue bonds end up being more expensive because in order for the bank to take on that risk, they have to get more back?
They tend to be a little bit higher, and as I said, they're backed up by the operation of the network and the revenue that's generated by it. So they're a little more difficult to get. So you need to have a good business plan in order to get these, in order to access that market.
That's a very interesting point. In other words, you might not be able to get a revenue bond because nobody likes your business plan.
There's certainly that potential.
Yeah. Okay.
The fact that there's all this grant funding being invested into these networks is very helpful.
And I'm trying to be difficult here. I'm just trying to understand.
No. I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
I'm not a bond expert, so I'm trying to be a little bit careful.
Okay.
And if it helps, I can just quickly try to explain what's going on, as I understand it, in the Bennington CUD. So they are working directly with Consolidated Communications. And like Rob said, there is some parts of that network that's going to be owned publicly. But for the most part, it's going to be owned by Consolidated Communications. And any bonding that they do, they will pay it back by a little service fee that they put on the individual monthly bills that they get. And again, I'm probably looking fairly short-sighted and lacking the larger picture of what could happen here, but it seems to me that's very likely what our program will be. It will be not very much publicly owned infrastructure, and the existing providers will own and operate the network.
I think that's accurate. That's the path of least resistance, most likely, and that may not require any bonding whatsoever. And then within the case of Southern Vermont, I believe they figured it out where they're not going to have to bond in order to do it with their model. We don't know what the situation is going to be for Chittenden County until those conversations and negotiations can happen.
Yeah, I have, so I understand the broadband for all, and I think that the coverage gets to most communities, but I had heard you mention before that there's that percentage that you're trying to target that you can't. And I heard before, well, we can plan for conduit for new, housing or, new development, but what about those folks that don't have that and there's no overhead? Like, how do we reach those folks, and who puts that bill?
So it's part of our mission to make sure everybody is served. So that's what comes down to the business plan and comes down to your negotiations with the provider of whether those are going to be high cost areas or how you're going to figure that out. It might have to be an infrastructure fee in order to pay for more conduit to be put in. Like there's a variety of different options, but the whole point of a universal service plan is we want to bring everybody up. If you don't have service that's the equivalent that can meet 25.3 right now, we want to make sure that you're going to have service that reaches 100 by 100 by the time we're done with this. There's areas the cable companies didn't go because there's not enough density. We want to go to those places because we believe that it's universal service. It's an essential public service right now, as we saw during the pandemic.
No,
And
I understand. I've heard for years, that coverage is going to be implemented. And I'm a teacher, and I have kids that still don't have access.
Right.
And how do we get that to them? How do we get those families? It's just seems like that's still lacking. We get the broad, percentage, the majority, but that minority still is missing.
Well, you're not getting any grant funding from us unless you figure that out, and that's what that's what it comes down to. That's what we're requiring every provider for universal service because we don't want. That's what's happened in the past. Those tough to get areas have been left behind, and we're frankly tired of it.
No,
That's the legislature is tired of it. So, yep.
Any further questions? I guess the question for us then is, are we interested in pursuing this at another meeting? So if there a straw vote for those of you who are interested in that, raise your hand.
Well, can I ask, what are we're asking, are we going to study this further, or are we going to have a vote the next time we talk?
My plan would be is if we're interested in doing it at all, that we would have another meeting that we would discuss any further questions that we have and have a vote by the board to have a townwide vote.
And this is to create or join a CUD?
To create a CUD.
Just want to make sure I understand what it is that we're.
So our part at this point, if we're having a vote, it would be to create a CUD.
Okay.
And my presumption is that this would be not a separate ballot item, but one that's added to the November ballot. Is that right?
The timing there is I think the deadline by the Secretary of State's office is August 9th to add any local articles to that ballot. So that's the I believe the timeline working with for that option. But if the town wanted to hold a special meeting, the town could also hold it and mail out have its own separate ballot available. But there's a cost to that as well. But those are the options for the board if it wants to ask this question to voters in November of this year.
I see this as a matter of equity and access, and I think that this is an opportunity for our town to be a leader in our county and in our region in providing that equity and access. So, yeah.
And if you recall, for several administrations now, the legislature has been interested in getting the last mile, and this is a way to do it. There's just not enough money in state monies to do it.
If I could add to what Greta just said is, even if it was just Williston, we were going to form our own. I think I'd still be, I don't think, I know I'd still be interested.
Yeah, I'm interested, and I'm likely to support it. But there are questions that I need more information.
And that's fine.
Historically, this is like the rural electrification issues, though, where like the rural farms wouldn't get the electricity because there wasn't enough payback for the utility company to run the wire out there.
Right.
And I'd be happy to connect you all with with existing communication union districts so you can learn how they operate, and if that's helpful. I can also feel free to reach out with any specific questions.
Have I share Ted's concern, is I feel like I'm kind of entering the unknown, and I'm never going to get to a point where I feel like I truly understand and thus can form a strong, sound decision. So let me ask one question. Has anybody created a CUD and it's failed?
Not yet. So we're hoping, but we're not hoping for any failure. We're certainly hoping that there's not going to be any failure, but they do have to come together and come up with a business plan that works and that will accept it, because we're stewards of a lot of federal and state funds right now, and if we're going to be investing them, we want to make sure that it's successful.
And as I recall, Rob, that there's articles of incorporation, just with the legal side of establishing a CUD that I can review. And if the board is interested in looking at this further, I can review those with the town attorney and come back to the board with any items the town attorney addresses there as well. It's certainly, forming a new government is no small feat, and to be one of the towns that may step forward to do it for this certainly bears with it a lot of responsibility. So I want to make sure if the board wants to ask this to the voters, I'll be the pathway to get all those questions answered here over the next couple of months.
And one other thing you have going for you is there's 9 ahead of you that have gone through this process, that have developed the bylaws, that have developed the conflict of interest policies, the procurement policies, all of that stuff. That's the administrative back end of things.
Sounds good.
So I hear 4 that want to proceed. Gordon?
No, I'm definitely in favor. I'm just my reservations are, I have more questions on how we reach the rural folks that don't get that opportunity, but I'm definitely in favor.
So we are in favor at this point of moving forward. And we'll be discussing this at another meeting. And I think the challenge to us now is to feed questions to Eric, to feed to both and to
And the only question I have
This is about the need for better broadband.
I think we all know that, but
I'm trying to figure out a timing issue. So we'll need to make a decision by early August, it sounds like, whether we want to put this on the ballot or not.
August 9th would be the time that we would need to have this done. So we would need to do it probably late July.
Will we know by that time whether there's another municipality interested and one that we feel we can work with?
I don't know whether they would, I think CZRPC would probably know
You want to
that.
hold just a minute? Sorry, the online dropped.
We're
Well,
back.
if we had 100,
You're absolutely right.
I'm seeing a lot of lightning outside right now, so I'm guessing it may have something to do with that. Lightning?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Everyone on Zoom has access, but
They're removing the camera. Should be back here just a minute.
so did,
we're back on.
okay. Did Regina?
No, we're back.
hear the question? No.
okay. So the question is it's a timing thing. We need to make a decision by August 9th, I've heard, about whether we want to, put this item on the ballot. Will we know at that time what other towns or cities in the area are also interested in doing that? Because not only is it a question of are another town interested, it's also wanting to make sure we're comfortable, working with this town on this CUD.
Yeah, interesting. Good question. So tomorrow we are having a meeting with the other municipalities that we've been talking to about this. So we will certainly know more tomorrow about how folks are comfortable sort of bringing this forward in time for meeting that deadline. And I think that deadline is putting your question on the general election ballot is ideal because it doesn't cost anything more to the town. But if you did have your own special town meeting, your deadline's not quite that tight. So that's the sort of pro and con of that. But certainly we will continue the conversations. Eric and Aaron have been a part of that thus far. So we'll be able to keep you as informed as possible as we move through.
Any final questions? If not, thank you both for coming
Thank you.
tonight and giving us the information, and we'll be, Eric and Aaron will be back in touch with you.
Great,
Very welcome.
thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
bye.
Let's move on then to the user fee and charges schedule, and we have Bruce Orr and Chief Collette on the line, I believe, and Eric going to lead off with the what we're planning on doing here.
Yep, this is one of the issues the board considers each June is setting our user fee and charges for the new fiscal year coming up in FY23, just a couple of weeks away. I've included in your packet memos from Public Works Director Bruce Hoare and Fire Chief Aaron Collette that outline those fees proposed for this year. The utility rates and fees were included in the utility budgets the board approved back in May. So those you'll see those same numbers here. In addition, we'll speak to a couple new fees I'll briefly touch on now that there's a temporary events permit in place, establishing a starting fee for that. Then Chief Collette will go through the ambulance billing fees proposed for this year. Terry, do you have a preference? You Public Works or Fire first?
Why don't we do fire first?
Okay, I'll turn over to Chief Collette.
I think it's timely that we have this discussion as I'm sitting here at the house with very limited service. So I hope that we can navigate this okay with enough bandwidth. So in front of you, you see, I assume Eric's distributed the memorandum. And what this does is sets the user fee rate schedule for ambulance billing for the town. We last increased this in 2021. With this, we evaluated all of our neighboring partners in EMS, 8 communities, and this is really the work of Lisa Stedman, our administrative assistant. So Lisa takes all of that and then compiles the average for the neighboring agencies that we work in partnership with, and looked at what that cost for service is out and about. And as all of you know, the inflation has driven our costs up, including increased costs with supplies and fuel. In addition, we also have seen an increased level of capability that we are able to serve the community with the addition of paramedic level service and more paramedics on staff, which is a great thing. So we are out and about. But that means that, we do reflect a little bit increase in cost. So when we look at the evaluation and the averages of the other communities, we saw that we were deficient in a couple of areas. And what we did is looked at where we may be able to make up some revenue. Unfortunately, as you know, or you may remember from last year when we had this discussion, the Medicare and Medicaid have fixed rates of reimbursement. So whether we increase that cost locally here at the municipal level, they still have fixed fees that are set by CMS. And so we won't be able to collect more than the allowed rate for Medicaid and Medicare. The areas that we did identify that we could help offset some of our costs would be to catch up with the local agencies that are around us. In table number 3 of the memo, it shows that currently for a BLS emergency call, and the average that is out across the community, the greater Chittenden County area, is about $845. So we're under many of those other communities with that $750. In addition, the ALS 1 charge, where we are currently at $950, the average is well over 1,000, nearly 1,100. And the ALS 2 charge, we're at $1,295, and the average is over 1,400. And so the other area that we were deficient was in our mileage, where we're charging $19 a mile right now, $19 per loaded mile. And we see an opportunity there to increase it to the average, which is over $22 an hour, $22 per mile. And so we would be looking to bring that up to $22 to meet the average that's occurring across Chittenden County. That we've actually, if you look in, again, table 3, there's only 4 proposed increases that we're recommending. All of the rest of them, we are remaining fixed with our current fee schedule. Eric did challenge us to look at other alternatives for revenue. We did look at 3 areas here. We looked at responses where we don't transport a patient. We looked at a lift assist, and then field termination responses, which mean that we have a cardiac arrest patient who we work through a resuscitation protocol on scene and then ultimately declare the patient deceased. When we looked at all of those, there was only one agency that charges a fee for a non-transport, that's Essex Rescue. We looked at that, we talked to our billing agent with this, and ultimately we made the decision that this probably wasn't going to be a good option for us. We didn't want to discourage people from calling EMS because of the fee. They were going to be worried about receiving a fee. And that same sentiment occurs when we looked at lift assist. So when we look at our population that we serve and they need help, we don't want to disincentivize them from calling 911 for fee that they're going to get a bill for us helping them back into their bed or back into their wheelchair or the like. So we elected not to pursue that. And in fact, when we polled the 8 neighboring communities, there was no one that was charging for the lift assist. However, that does occur across the country, but that's just not something that I want to try to look at right now. We did find that 50% of the agencies that we polled were billing for field termination responses. And so those agencies were Burlington, Colchester, Milton, and Richmond. The field termination and resuscitation, so we work a very aggressive advanced life support protocol, and that costs the department significant amount of funds and equipment that we use on those calls. And all of that is essentially written off, right? Non-collectible. So I would like this to consider that we would adopt and to look at this going forward and actually try to invoice for those field termination responses. But my recommendation is that we only invoice the patient's insurance, and that if the patient's estate would not be charged, or the patient's loved ones wouldn't see a bill afterwards. So we have a connection through the Vermont Health Information Exchange where we could access patient information through their insurance information, and that's how we would bill that. The rationale that I have for that is that when we provide that level of service, much like the hospital, and unfortunately the hospital sees patients who do expire despite the best efforts of medical clinicians, that the hospital still bills for those services. And I think that that's the same mentality I'd like to adopt here, is that we do our best to try to resuscitate a patient and to the greatest ability that we have, but we lose that, it's essentially a very costly endeavor for us. So I'd like to be able to pursue that as some method to augment the service that we provide. So at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but ultimately we're looking for just a $100 increase for the BLS emergency call, a $100 increase on the ALS 1 emergency call, a $105 increase for the ALS 2 classification of emergency call, and a $3 per loaded mile increase to match. All of these would catch us up to the average in the neighboring communities.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for the chief regarding the requests for increases?
To say, Chief, could you? I always get confused with this. When the ambulance goes out, and is the fee that's charged for that ambulance service dependent on what entity needs, the person who needs needs the service, or is it based on what is provided by that crew on the ambulance?
So it is based upon the level of service that we provide. So the clinician will look and say the patient meets this clinical protocol, and then these are the procedures that follow that protocol. And then so we will apply those procedures as set by the EMS district to that for that patient care. So the more critical a patient, the higher level of service that we provide. So if the patient fits basic life support criteria, where we maybe simply do some bleeding control or splinting or something that's not necessarily invasive, then that would get billed at that BLS rate, because we don't do anything in an advanced service delivery. But when we see patients that fit that advanced life support, where we have our paramedics or an advanced EMT providing intravenous fluids or medications, or doing EKG recognition and rhythm interpretation, or advanced assessments, including breath sounds or any of the other sophisticated equipment or diagnosis that our team can go do, then that's when we provide that level of service.
Okay, all right, good, thank you. And then the other question I have is, it's the mileage rate. The $22 a mile, and I'm not objecting to it, but I just think at the mileage rate I get reimbursed for, it's like 85 cents. And so I'm like, what goes into that mileage rate? Why is it, compared to 85 cents a mile, so much greater? I mean, I understand it's a bigger vehicle, it uses more fuel, maybe depreciation, it's a much more expensive vehicle, depreciation, the insurance that you need to carry on it. Can you just help me understand that?
Sure. I mean, I honestly, Jeff, I look at it as the industry trend. To answer it with full transparency, I would have to look at it more. I know that the industry drives that number. So the average of what's happening out there. The Medicare rate is only at $8 a mile. The Medicaid rate is only at $6 a mile. So we could set that rate at 19 or 22 like we are, but we're only going to get reimbursed at those 6 or 8 for the majority of our Medicaid and Medicare patients. So I would have to look into more to see what that actually, why is that set like that? Okay. I don't know the answer.
An industry standard than it is. You've looked at what cost you want to be reimbursed for as part of that fee, and then, divided by the total miles you think that ambulance will travel in a year. Okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions for the chief? We'll move on to the utilities with Bruce.
Okay, you have the memo to Eric. All these rates that you see on all these are rates that were already set in the budget. Water retail rate is going from $5.10 to $5.30, which is a 3.92% increase. Sewer retail rate, $7.49 to $7.75, 3.47% increase. The other rates are all raised using the CPI, which we use 3.50%. Yeah, percent. So the residential water rate per quarter is $6.02. Commercial will be $12.06, and the sewer rate, basic user charge. I'm sorry, that's basic user charges. For sewer, increases to $16.57 per quarter. Stormwater rate staying the same at $4.25 per ERU. Haven't changed that since the inception of the utility. And water and sewer connection rates are all raised based on the CPI as well. And those are on the memo, water and sewer connection fees for FY23, what they're going to.
And all of these will support the budget that we approved a few weeks ago?
That's correct.
Questions for?
And then I like the way they're already set. We really don't. Don't have to ask questions like, $22 a month.
I would just add the sewer allocation charge increase we're proposing from $10 to $15 a gallon is based on a recent valuation study for the Essex Junction plant that the board's seen. But just to call out that number, because that is a change, hasn't been adjusted for a number of years.
Right. And that's based on our negotiations with the village over what we're going to hopefully purchase additional sewage capacity for, correct?
Yep, and the report that looked at that valuation is where we rounded it up to the nearest dollar there,
Okay.
or up to 15.
Any further questions? There is a motion suggested.
I'll move to adopt the municipal user fee and charges schedule for the fiscal year 2023 as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're done. Thank you very much.
Terry, could I just have 1 minute, please?
Absolutely, sure.
I just want to let the select board know that the nice emerald ash borer that we've been removing trees for the past 5 years is now confirmed in Williston. It was found in ash trees in Best Buy's parking lot and has done quite a bit of damage, which means it's actually probably been around for a little while. But it's the first confirmation that we are now one of the zones that has the bug. So just want to let you know before you hear it somewhere else.
Where did you say you found it?
Best Buy.
I'm sorry?
Where did you say you found it?
The state found it in Best Buy's parking lot.
Okay.
You'll see a whole row of trees there that are dead. And if you have any interest in seeing, I've gotten a lot of reports over the years. Oh, we've got the EAB, we've got the EAB. Well, you go over there and look at those trees and you'll see the telltale signs of those bugs, and there's no mistaking them. That the shape, the D size shape that they make when they come out is like the most perfect D you've ever seen. And like one of my guys said today, is it a small D or a capital D? It's the capital D. So.
Well, thanks. It was good for us to get ahead of it anyway. So that's good. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
EAB gets high marks for their penmanship.
Moving on to fire warden appointment, and Eric, a few words about something simple.
Yep, and it's the forest fire warden. I forgot the word forest in the agenda, but you might recall Chief Collette filled the remainder of retired Chief Morton's term when he became chief. And then this is up for a 5-year reappointment at the end of this month for 5 years through 2027. One of the requirements we ask the fire chief is to serve in this role. But Chief Solon, if you have any questions about duties as forest fire warden.
Any questions for Eric or for the chief? Looking for a motion then.
Move to reappoint Fire Chief Aaron Collette, Forest Fire Warden for a 5-year term through June 30, 2027.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Moving on to the Ellenbrook Master Plan, and we have Todd Goodwin with us tonight. And at the last time we had this presented, 2 of our board members were absent, so there may be some more questions tonight from them. But Eric, if you can give us a brief introduction.
Sure, thanks, Terry. Sure. Oh, I see Todd now. Hi, Todd. This was back in late April. The board received an overview of the draft updated master plan for Ellenbrook Park from the SC Group, our consultant. They worked in coordination with the Recreation and Parks Committee and Director Todd Goodwin. The agenda item this evening is for the board to consider adopting this master plan update for Ellenbrook Park. And as a reminder for the board and folks watching, the master plan does not commit the town financially. Rather, it's a vision for the park that will be further developed and planned in future capital budgets and future town capital plans. So I'll turn it over to Todd and the board if there's any additional discussion or questions on this proposal.
Todd, you can go ahead.
I don't have anything other than to answer any of your questions for the questions that you have. I will say that, the last time SE Group was here to do the presentation, they did a good job with that. They did a good job overall with the master plan. The Recreation and Parks Committee acted as the group, and they did an excellent job as well, working with SE Group to plan a park for everyone, all ages, everything. And the future is to look to build out that park and be aware of equity, inclusiveness, and everything else, and the different things that goes into that park.
So as usual with these kind of things, there's a large ticket price over the course of numerous years. And I think the report outlined the projected costs and also some funding sources as well.
That's correct. Yeah.
So questions from the board regarding the plan?
So first of all, I wish I had seen the presentation. I also apologize for not getting back to you and Eric about the email you sent to meet with you. Just, it's the classic. It slipped down in my inbox and unfortunately never came out, never saw the light of day again. So I apologize for that because I would like to be more informed than I am. First comment is sticker shock, but I think that's normal for anything that we end up doing. Which leads to my next question, which is, given the phased approach and that the town may be only able to do this in maybe some fairly lengthy time in between, we can go from, let's say, phase A to phase B1. Is the plan put together in a way in which we can do that? And what I mean by that is we won't be left with a facility that really isn't all that useful because we haven't gotten to B1 yet. Does that make sense?
Yep. Currently up there's just 2 fields. I mean, right now we call it Allenbrook Community Park, but it's really not a park. It's 2 multi-purpose fields that we use for lacrosse in the springtime and soccer in the fall. It's open to other times and, for groups to use, but the parking is difficult and everything else. So phase 1 is that infrastructure of giving us our own access in, building a parking lot that's closer to it would be one of the existing fields, possibly the other existing field, which, ultimately at the end, could that be a synthetic turf or not? But natural to begin with. So taking what we have, building that infrastructure would help to use those 2 fields more than they're being used right now. So that would be phase 1 and some money to that. When we get into phase 2 or 2A, 2B, and that would be the playgrounds, the splash pads, the bathrooms, the courts and stuff like that, then we're getting into developing more of that community park for everybody to use. So the quick answer is phase 1 is going to get us closer to and using the same existing fields that we have by developing another one and keeping one there and possibly be able to use it more. And that will hopefully would generate some money and helping us to move on and building phase 2. The other thing that you'll see coming forward to the board soon is park donation, naming rights, those types of things, because if somebody came along and wanted to build a pavilion and have it named after somebody, that would give us that opportunity to look at that look at who wants to make that donation, that type of thing, make sure it fits all our criterias, and then the town gets a pavilion that the taxpayers didn't have to pay for. So that growth. And then the final phase is that baseball field kind of complex. And if we, again, the synthetic turf of the future, and that is an opportunity to bring in tournaments and the synthetic turf to use more, with extend the season on the shoulder ends of, and even with our bad weather type of a thing. So that, and lighting, so that brings in that revenue that helps to feed back to paying for the future. That's the future of paying for what we've built prior to. It is a large ticket price if you were just going to say, we're going to clear everything and build it tomorrow. But if we phase it, look for grant opportunities, naming or donations, that type of thing. And then when you have that fee that you're looking to pay back, those tournaments and synthetic turf or whatever else gets put back into that and pay. So hopefully over time it pays for itself.
And would the tournaments be, it sounds like some baseball tournaments, soccer tournaments,
Yeah,
I'm not sure what else.
the baseball is set up to be 2 Little League fields. And I don't mean those to be baseball. I would like to see them set up so that they're baseball or softball.
Okay.
There's you can bring in the mound for baseball, but if you remove the mound, then it's flat for softball. So having 2 of those, there would be able to be a softball tournament or a baseball tournament. And that we also look at as equity, inclusive. We're not just providing for baseball games to be played or softball games or one of each, but you can't hold a tournament because you only have one of those type. The third field is a Babe Ruth field. And right now we have 2 adult leagues. I had a third one I didn't have room for, and they didn't want to take an afternoon. We have strikers, and then we have the Williston Babe Ruth, who sometimes shares with Shelburne, and there's not enough room for everybody at this point in time. So there's that need. And the synthetic turf would be that soccer, and that could be soccer, lacrosse, football, all those field types of sports to be used.
So if you don't mind me repeating what I think I just heard to make sure I got it. You don't see any issues with this being a very desirable place for people to pay to have tournaments held here?
Right, no. And, we do a lot now here at Village Park with groups, ultimate frisbee and adult soccer and that kind of thing. But I think if planned and built right, this opened up that opportunity to be a regional place that people would want to come to, our organizations or groups would want to come to have tournaments.
Given it was nice to see all the, potentials for ways to fund or finance this. Given that, what can we expect to be the burden on the taxpayers? And I don't actually know exactly what I need to hear back from that, but it is important to have an understanding. I mean, for instance, one way to look at it is, can we expect 50% of this?
I'm gonna hold, sorry, I think we lost again.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
So when you're talking money and taxpayers and stuff like that, I probably would go back to Eric there, but we have a good amount of rec impact fees right now that would help us to start this process. I've been talking with Eric, and I'll let him, he's talked about the current bond, and that would on other items, and that's coming to kind of a sunset of being paid off. So, maybe we move it back. There's the capital program, which you talked about, that, if we have the approval moving forward, we start looking at how we can fund these. So could there be something to taxpayers? Yes. Who knows what that is? Because you can try for grants, hope that you get them. If you don't, that either puts the burden more on the taxpayer, or it holds the project off and it's not done at this point in time. Eric, do you?
Yep, I can jump in, Todd, where we look at something like this with multiple phases over multiple years. I think with the plan's trying to design that first phase as building in that critical infrastructure for access for the existing facilities, and then looking to build it over time. So certainly leveraging the rec impact fees that we've already held, thinking about what this is the future of the rec impact fee and how that may move forward the additional phases of this project, and understanding with this is a vision, and some of the figures put together by the consultants are our best estimate right now, and understanding if there's ways to trim this back as well. I think they identified some of the paving or putting curbing in as well as or some larger ticket items they included that could get scaled back. But I think this creates the roadmap and the vision for the ideal park, but it's going to take multiple years and additional capital planning, and recognizing where funding would come from to how much is built out and when. But I think there's potential to start the first phase here in the coming years, and looking at how that rounds out financially. But it would be something that comes back to the board before moving forward in any phases of this, and certainly looking at the financial aspect, and if the town were to consider borrowing money at some point, what that may look like. But certainly not something I want to look at too much right now. But as Todd mentioned, our bonding capacity in a few years we'll have some more room in it as well. But I think I can take any additional questions there.
And again, if you, to go off what Eric was saying, if you look at the plan, it's really the bells and whistles. Like he said, the curbing. If you go to any of our parks right now, there's no curbing in our parks, and it's actually, we can do without it, but it's nice to have. 2 of our parks have gravel parking lots, and one doesn't. Maybe a parking lot starts off gravel, but over time can become paved or whatever else. So it's, again, looking at things, and if we can scale back and still do things properly and save some money, and then as money is generated, can go back to those. So even phase 1, it doesn't need to be completely done. It can be partially done, so long as we have that solid infrastructure, and then we can go and put the bells and whistles on it later.
Okay.
So it's better to get something than have nothing.
Right.
So.
Do you anticipate, and this is probably a question for Eric, that we'll start to see this in the capital budget next year?
Yeah, if the board wants to move forward with this master plan, it's I know this park build out's been planned for many years, and there hasn't been a lot of activity in recent years. So I would work with Todd to next think about what's that phase 1, help we look for permitting and design work on it. Just we're talking about new access. There's certainly a large stormwater component to it as well for the permitting. So that would be my plan in the next capital plan, working with Todd, how the first phase could begin here from a design and permitting standpoint, and then probably in the year after that, we would have a good sense of what it was going to cost, and then working to understand how that would work, looking at our impact fees as our first pool of funds to look to utilize.
Other questions?
I know I played a lot of baseball in my day, and I just hope for grass. When I hear artificial turf, that's like a dream come true. So if we can pay for it, great.
Did the ball react on the grass compared to the artificial?
I don't know. We had a lot of pebbles, Jeff. Yeah. It was mostly grass.
That's what you blamed all those those errors on.
We'll talk about those errors tonight.
It is definitely bells and whistles in a dream, but
Sure.
You got to put it down to, hopefully make it, see it happen someday.
No.
Well, it sounds like the real rubber hits the road when we start to get into the design and the cost and.
Yep.
Okay.
Sure. Any last questions? If not, then I'm looking for a motion.
Move to approve the Allenbrook Park Master Plan as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion on that motion?
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
If not, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
I,
Aye. Any opposed? We have passed that. Thank you again, Todd, for all your hard work on that. Moving to the community center scoping and library assessment project, then Eric, this is yours.
Yep, and I've got Jane Kearns, our library director, is also on Zoom this evening if any questions come up for Jane. Hi, Jane. So I've been working with Jane and Todd on next steps to get the project underway for the library assessment and community center scoping study that's included in the town's FY23 capital budget. You may recall these discussions from last winter. This project will work with an architectural consultant to assess the options for these spaces. And in my memo, those are a recap of what some of these options may be. Our plan is to issue an RFP in July to find this right consultant or combination of consultants. And the board identified ARPA funds to pay for this work in the capital budget for FY23. For the library component, the work would include a building condition assessment of the current space. And in looking at the library and community center concept in this project, the goal is to identify the space needs on a programmatic basis, understanding the cost estimate for new construction and or renovation or addition when looking at the library. And ultimately, the library trustees and the select board would need to decide on any preferred alternative and whether the project would continue to any degree at this time following an initial scoping study that we're looking at here. So as we're thinking about this project and how to tackle it, a concept I want to suggest the board consider is looking at standing up a steering committee for this work. I've put a draft structure in the memo. The draft entails that would include a member of the select board, a member of the library trustees, a member of the Recreation and Parks Committee, and then 4 community at-large members appointed by the select board. And these committee seats can be further defined or left as community at large for discussion and how to create the best committee to fulfill the goals and this charge during the interview process of anyone interested in serving in this role. And the steering committee would be staffed by myself as town manager, the library director, and the Recreation and Parks director. And I view the steering committee to really guide the consultant's work in examining the possible alternatives for the spaces per a final report for the select board and library trustees to review and discuss. And these committee members to be champions for community outreach on the project, as I really feel that that's going to be key to hear from the community, especially when looking at features and programmatic elements to consider in any such of a future community space here, because the component we need to study is the cost for these items. I'm certain there's a lot of great ideas and a lot of concepts out there, but I know the town looked at this in 2007 and reading the old report, and I think that'll be helpful in getting this project started. There's likely be a number of the same themes, but also understanding what the cost is for the boards to look at here and understanding is if there is a desire to move forward, what that scope would look like, and understanding what those elements are and what costs come with those elements that the community may be looking for there. So I shared this. I met with the library trustees last night to get their thoughts on a steering committee concept to share with the select board. From that discussion last night, the trustees made a suggestion to make sure there's a balance in any community at-large appointments, to make sure there's voices with interest in the library and community center. And I imagine there'll be a number of folks who may be interested in serving on such a committee that have some experience and with both of these services and in the community. The message from the trustees is wanting to avoid appointing folks with just interest in, say, the community center and not the library, and trying to find a balance that you want to pass on the select board. And also wondered if, for these community members at large, if that's the direction the board wants to go in, if the trustees could play any role in perhaps reviewing applications or offering any comments. So should the select board want to look at this concept further, the question is how to fill these seats and whether we want to define further the criteria for each, or just leave it for community members at large, or a different iteration, and provide direction as they're being reviewed for how the board wants to round out that group. I also shared the proposal with the members of the Recreation and Parks Committee to see if they had any comments to pass on to the select board. And I just heard from a couple members who are in support of the concept is what they wanted to share. So I can pause there for any questions, and gonna get a drink of water anyway. So happy to take any question.
Anything to add, Jane?
No, thank you for summarizing that, Eric. It was a nice meeting last night, and we're obviously very looking forward to moving forward and with the scoping study, and thank you for considering the committee structure. The community engagement piece obviously is going to be really important in this, and I think the committee structure recognizes that.
Good, thank you. And so any questions from the board or concerns about the committee structure?
My question isn't specific to the committee structure, but I know there's a kind of a groundswell of support in the town for a community pool or a town pool. And I just want to make sure, because it's not explicitly outlined, that would be part of this process too, because I think that's what we had discussed previously, including that in this process.
Yep. Good question, Greta. I would include any discussion for a pool in any configuration as part of that programmatic discussion for a community center. Certainly a big question will be what the cost would be, and if there's we find, and I've heard from a number of folks with interest there as well. So I anticipate as part of this work that'll be something that's explored, and then the financial aspect to come up and be drilled out in this study a little bit more as well. But yeah, certainly that would be a concept, and I think the part of the challenge will be hearing from community members with ideas and having the consultant help see what's viable and at what scale for consideration as we go here.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Eric, could you remind me how much was budgeted or how much is included in this year's budget and next year's budget?
Yep, the designation was $60,000 in ARPA funds for this. I tried to get the best estimate. I ran this by a architect who's worked with the town in the past to give me an estimate, and that's the number they provided. But that was also in November, so I'm not exactly sure what we'll see through the RFP process. If we do have a variance from there, I'll speak with the board and also look at the budget to see where the gap may be filled in, and keep the board posted on this process.
If there's no other questions or comments, so we'll be discussing this again to formally start the process going. And thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you, Eric. Moving on to the municipal tax rate. Tonight is the night we have to set that. And there's some good news on this. And Eric, I think you and Shirley are going to be talking about this.
Yep, I'll let Shirley take the lead on this, and as she gets set up, we'll be sharing. The grand list was finalized, and when we worked with the town assessor back in October, November to try to predict how it was going to grow, we always take a conservative estimate here. So our conservative estimate was 0.75%, and the good news is it grew to almost 2%. So that will affect the tax rate recommended for the board to consider this evening. So I'll turn over to Shirley to walk through the calculation here.
Okay. See,
Thank you.
we already did part of the memo, so thank you, Eric. So in the town budget that was passed by the residents of Williston was $13,148,554. $1,512,080 is to be funded by property taxes. So as Eric noted, we used a grand list value of just an increase of 0.75%, working with Bill at the time we were putting the budget together. The grant list value now set at $2,122,873, I'm sorry, $2,122,873,315 following grievance hearings that ended last week. The 2021 grand list value used in calculating the tax rate was the $2 million, I'm just going to round it off, $2,084,000. So increase of $39 million or 1.88%. So based on these calculations, we worked back into what the revised tax rate would be, and it would be 0.3068 as compared to the FY22 tax rate was 0.2721. So on 100,000 assessed value, that becomes $306.80 compared to $272.10 for FY22. So an increase of $34.70 on 100,000 of assessed value. And then the memo goes on because in the budget process, we talked about the medium assessed value of $302,000. So looking at those calculations, that would be $105 a year or $8.75 a month. Our original projection in the budget that was passed by the taxpayers was a rate of 0.3104. So we happily had some increase or decrease in that rate. In comparison, 1 cent on the 2021 grand list raised 208,000 and change, and the 2022 grand list raises 212,000 and change, or increase of $4,000. So not significant. Then I'll just go to the calculation. I just shortened this up quite a bit from what you used to see. So basically, the grand list value is $21,228,773. Looking at a tax rate, so our tax rate in two pieces, one for the current use and veterans exemptions, and then one we just say for general governmental activities. So general governmental activities was 0.3062, and then to fund the current use and the veterans exemption, we needed the 0.0006 to get to a total municipal rate of 0.3068. And that is it. And the first tax bills, similar to last year, will go out around July, by or before July 15th, with the first installment due August 15th.
Questions for Shirley?
Sorry, I'll try to be quick. Shirley, I'm on page 2.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first one is, we had pretty extensive discussions about using the fund balance during the budget season. So I guess there's no reason to have any further discussion at this point, or would you concur with that?
Well, I guess maybe I'd look to Eric for protocol here, but can we change that?
Well,
because it's been voted on by the residents.
Good question. Yeah.
Right.
I think
So
in the past, we have used fund balance at this point. Correct me where I'm wrong.
It's been in the budget. And
Yes.
it's been approved.
and it is in the budget.
Yeah, Jeff, the amount to raise by taxes was part of the warning. So we worked backwards from that calculation to come up with the rate.
So in other words, we don't have the ability to do that now.
No, but the correct, the amount of taxes has to match what was.
Then good. All right. The term estimate for the grand list, I was just trying to make sure I understood that. Because when we're setting the tax rate, we're setting a pretty specific tax rate, but we're basing it on an estimate? Just help me understand that.
Eric asked me the same question, and I
Good.
looked back at the last few years, but I looked back at last year, and there was like a $10,000 change between this calculation and the final. So the Form 411 is what gets filed to the state of Vermont in July, I believe it is. So there was a couple more small changes that went through. So I said to Eric, I really didn't want to say it was final because there still might be a little change in it. So hence the word estimate, but I don't think it will change.
So can I ask this last question? This is for my own information. What is the grand list that we ultimately would use if we could? It sounds like we can't because it isn't available yet, but we ultimately would use if we could. When is that estimate established, or not estimate, when is that value established? Is it like June 30th, so we have it going into the new fiscal year?
You know what? I'd have to get back to you, Jeff, on that.
It's a very nuanced question, I get it.
It is, but I actually don't think the listers file the final grand list until November or October. So it's later in the year, but when they actually file the final copy to the state of Vermont.
And that would be.
And I'll verify that for you, but.
The final grand list for fiscal year 2022?
22, 23. So, yeah, we're in the year before it gets filed. We're in the current tax year before the final grand list is filed.
Okay.
And Jeff, the board will see the errors and omissions in the fall. And so that becomes the final number, that the education rate, that becomes the final grand list per se at that point.
Okay, right, because also important is how is the education rate? Yeah, okay. My last question is a quick one. The veterans exemption, remind me what that is?
Sure. The state allows the $10,000 veterans exemption. The town of Williston offers $40,000, so it's the difference between those, it's the $30,000 difference that Williston gives to veterans in addition. So it's a reduction of their appraised value.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, of their appraised value?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which in turn affects the tax they owe.
Right, correct.
Okay. All right, good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Shirley? I'm looking for a motion then.
Move to set the fiscal year 2023 tax rate at $0.3068.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion on the motion?
Thank you.
Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Shirley, and thank you, Eric, for getting this taken care of.
Well, I'm sitting here, Eric, because the next thing on the agenda is the questionnaire.
Yes.
And even though Mary does it, if you have any questions, I could answer them.
This is one we've seen every year.
You do.
It's,
And nothing changed from last year.
yeah, it looked the same to me, so it looked like we're handling our finances correctly, so.
Okay.
So you all have a copy of this in front of you, and Eric, any more comments regarding this?
Yep, this is just looking at our internal controls. It's a good self reflection practice for the town to look at with Mary Grattan, our treasurer, preparing this working with Shirley. So there isn't any formal motion to approve this for the board. We just asked the board consider a motion to acknowledge receipt of this questionnaire annually.
So if there are no questions on this, I'd be looking for that motion.
I'll move to acknowledge receipt of the financial management questionnaire for fiscal year 2022.
Is there a second?
Second.
And second. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right, we can go on to the manager's report. Which I think.
Thanks, Jerry. And while Shirley is there still, hopefully, I'll turn it to her. I just, Aaron helped distribute the May financials to each of your seats this evening, and Shirley can walk through those for you.
Okay. Sorry about the late arrival of these. So as usual, highlighted are the things that have changed. So the clerk the clerk recording revenue, just bringing it to your attention, we had budgeted 175,000. We have 124,000. Currently, I estimated about 15 more thousand for June, which will bring us under budget by about 35,000. About 25,000 of that will be offset by passport revenue, which we only had budgeted at $5,000 and is almost 26,000 right now, and we'll take more in June. So with the exception of about $10,000, those two revenue favorable and unfavorable variances will offset themselves. Planning and zoning revenue, 131% of budget. The only thing I added was the UVM Medical Center new permit for $9,725. Ambulance revenue has a budget of $360,000. We are now at $380,000. These are only for calls from, so because the number's high, and we actually for several years haven't even been at budget with ambulance revenue, and we have been bringing down that budget because we haven't met it. I then looked at the number of calls, the number of billable calls. So July of 20 to May of 21, we had 648 billable calls. July of 21 to May of 22, we've had 819. So it goes to back up everything that Chief's been saying about how busy they are. But even though the number of calls has substantially increased, the revenue hasn't increased because you heard Aaron talk about Medicaid, Medicare, and so many of our calls have that as the insurance provider. So our revenue doesn't jump by the same amount. And then just gave you the receivable balances. So at 5/31/21, the ambulance receivable was 147,000. At 5/31/22, it's at 224,000. So that has grown by 77,000. And at the end of the year, we will also look at that, all the receivables, and we looked at collectability, and we have a reserve against what we don't think is collectible. So that will change that number a little bit. Recreation revenue is now at 115% of budget. I think a lot of that we can say is people are really have transitioned out of COVID. Plus, it's a year-end timing thing. This year in FY22, we have 2 weeks of day camp revenue. Last year we had 1. The enrichment camps, we have more of this year, but there's 30 in all, with 12 of them being in FY22. So because we have 2 full weeks of camp in the current fiscal year, it also affects the revenue because I do post it in the year the revenue belongs to. The other thing I wanted to just mention is that I think we brought it to your attention that we have a contract with a new collection agency for the ambulance, and they've been doing a wonderful job. Their reporting is wonderful. What a difference. So that relationship is going very, very well. And they've done quite a bit of collections. We placed our 2017 accounts with them. We placed our 2018 accounts with them, and then current. And we will probably go back and place our 2019 accounts with them as well. So they've been doing a great job, and they charge us, the fees are a little bit different for the older ones, but let's see. Now I'm going to jump over to interest and miscellaneous revenue. I'm just pointing out the new piece of this is that that's going to be approximately 27,000 under budget for the year because nobody expected interest rates to bottom out as they have. Although we're starting to see them creep back with that 75 basis point increase last week. Let's see, police expenditures. The only new piece of this is in the police budget, we have the line for the Community Justice Center of our support of actual expenses above what the grant from the DOC provides. So the budget is set at 16, or I'm sorry, I didn't even write down. The budget is set at $12,000 and we're looking at support to the tune of 28,000. So possibly 16,000 over budget. So just the best projection for now. And then I'm going to move over to page 3, water, sewer, and stormwater. Water maintenance, we've been watching that through the winter, and I think Bruce may disagree with me at this point in the year, and I looked into June as well, and that 39% of budget is really coming from the fact that the weather was very kind to us, and we didn't have any major water breaks, which also affects the main repair and maintenance. So both of those things will be under budget for the year. So we'll have a favorable variance to budget. Right now, when you look at the water bond and principal payments at 43% of the budget, the reason why is our share of the debt to the water district is paid in June, and that's $55,000. So it'll essentially be right on budget at year end. And same thing for the sewer pump station debt is less than budget right now, but the final payment, which is like $47,000, is for the Industrial Avenue pump station and also was made in June already. So that puts us right on budget. Sewer outside services. We have talked about the first part of that sentence before because of passive billing, and that will only have 2 quarters of which will be January through June of 22 in 22. But part of that is going to be offset by an increase in legal fees. We had a budget of $500 and we'll be over by about $6,000. Just a variety of issues that came up within the sewer department. Part of it is legal related to the new contract with the Tri-Town agreement, but just other minor issues that have come up. And that is it.
Good, thank you. Any questions for Shirley?
No, thank you.
Good, thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you.
Eric, we're back to you.
Okay, thanks, Shirley. Let's see, just to follow up on an email I sent the board, and for folks watching, the repairs have started on the Talcott Road culvert issue that we were experiencing with a partial road closure. So thankfully, we believe the road should be opened in a couple of weeks here. They started work on Friday, and we should hopefully have that before by early July for that repair. You'll notice the blue rectangle behind Gordon and Greta on the wall. So this is we're thinking about, as we continue to look at our hybrid meeting setups, any potential additional equipment for the town to purchase. So thanks to Aaron for putting that rectangle on the wall. That is what a 75-inch television screen would look like. So I wanted to pose it to the select board before making any changes to the room. If the board be interested in a type of screen like that on the wall in the meeting room to be used to share, we would put it on a mounting bracket to come out and tilt for folks in the audience to see presentations and folks commenting on the hybrid meeting structure. And it could also be used by the board as a larger screen to view presentations. We may need to find, we want to put one on the other wall at some point as well, but before we purchased anything or made any changes, I wanted to get the board's feedback on putting any type of additional screen in the room. There is some room in the FY22 select board budget, so we could consider a purchase before the end of the month, or we can always wait and just think about this more as we go. So wanted to see the board had any thoughts on that this evening, and we can certainly wait to discuss this more in the future as well.
Totally in support. For some reason tonight, I was thinking as we were having that presentation on the CUD, and nobody in the audience could see the presentation. unless they had a laptop with them. And so I really like the idea of the audience being able to see what we see during the meetings. And when the Soccer World Cup comes around.
Pop some popcorn.
Connections to it from over there, is that doable without? Okay.
Yeah, I support that. Same note, many times, it was particularly apparent to me the day that the AP Triton did their presentation, and we had all the firefighters in the audience, and they were all crowded around Shirley's laptop, trying to watch the presentation. And so I think that this will only increase our accessibility and encourage involvement from community members when they're here. So I think it's great.
I think that's a really good question, though, about when it's mounted, will the wires just hang down, or will you'll put them in the wall? Because I think that's important. The aesthetics of this room actually is important. So, the professional install where we aren't seeing, the cables hanging down I think that would be kind of important.
And we're going to be looking too at essentially it's a smart TV and then just kind of the audio. I know you're hearing me from a speaker on the floor right now in the room, and just kind of what that, Bluetooth audio and the acoustics. And I think we've learned the last couple of years with the change in public participation in governance and access, and having department heads and folks join us remotely, and the flexibility that provides, trying to upgrade our meeting room with additional hardware and tools to just make that experience better for people on both ends. So it's a potential ARPA project for some additional hardware that working with staff on to see what that may be for the board to consider as some other purchases later this year as well.
Okay.
So we will. Sounds like we will work to get the television in here. So. Thank you. And I've, after a 2-year hiatus, returned to the town TV show What's Up Williston last week. I filmed the return episode, season 3. So I was able to sit down with, we did some using Zoom for that too now, which is nice. I went to the studio to film it live at 5:25. We had a good interview with Captain Prescott Netto of the fire department to go through the training academy that he led for our new firefighters. And then I spoke with Bonnie Lord, our youth services librarian, to preview summer reading. And chatting with Jane today, the summer reading kickoff on a cold, rainy Saturday had, I think, 85 young people and 100 parents at the library lawn. So it was a very well attended summer reading event. And I won't say they heard about it all on What's Up Williston, but maybe a couple people did. So that's back. And then one brief thing to share, Debbie Ingram served as our CCRPC alternate for a number of years. She had expressed to me she just has a lot on her plate and was not looking to be reappointed as the alternate. I've served in that role primarily for a period of time. I'm certainly willing to serve as the alternate, or if the board wants to advertise the alternate to the community, I'm happy to do that as well. But if the board had any feedback on that, I could either advertise it or consider an action item to fill that alternate seat next meeting.
I think it would probably be good to advertise it, and if we don't get any results of that, we'd be pleased to have you as the alternate. But looking down the road to replace the current person serving, if they decide not to continue, it would be nice to have somebody waiting in the wings. But if we don't get anybody, we don't get anybody.
So sounds good, Terry. We'll post that one, and I know we have a number of openings and trying to encourage folks to apply right now. So we'll add that to the list.
Yeah, it would be nice to get more people to take some of the positions that we have.
Yeah.
So Eric, you moved off of the Talcott Road culvert before I could ask a question. Not your.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. What is the price on that?
Yep. I got the final price today. It'd be $112,000.
Okay. And that's going to come out of the stormwater budget, if I remember correctly?
Yep, it is. I checked with Bruce, for all culvert repairs, we have a line item in that budget. And with something like this, with an emergency repair, we'll see where we end up for FY '22, but if we needed to use fund balance to cover that cost, share with the board during the budget process, we've got a good fund balance for these unforeseen circumstances right now.
Yeah. We did the Muddy Brook crossing on Shunpike, there was a question of whether that was a culvert or a bridge.
Yeah.
This is clearly a culvert, I assume.
Yeah, I thought of that, Jeff, and yeah, this is that pipe in the ground yeah, it's definitely, I can say it's a culvert.
So which thus makes it appropriate to fund under the stormwater budget.
Anything else, Eric?
Nope, that'll do it for this evening, and I hope to be back at the next meeting here. Thanks for hopefully the audio was good enough to hear me this evening. So thank you.
A lot better.
Thank you. Keep hearing the water.
Moving on to other business, are there any catering permits? I forgot to ask you.
Nope. Aaron, did anything come in today?
I didn't see anything.
Okay, nope, nothing for this one.
Any other business that people would like to talk about tonight? All right, then we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Ed.
Yeah.